Continuing through this series on Matthew 25 of what it looks like to love and to see the world as Christ saw the world. This invitation to go beyond the methods and the systems of religiosity, the religiosity that even Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, speaks out against, where he cries out and challenges that God doesn't want to hear our songs of worship or our prayers of adoration if we at first aren't willing to offer our acts of compassion and service to the world, to those who are in need of it. And so Jesus is articulating that, going through that in Matthew's gospel of what it actually looks like to love the unlovable, to love the outcast, to love those who the religious system would have said, you are cursed, you're not worthy to be a part of God's kingdom and God's grace. And Jesus says, no, you absolutely are. In fact, their position in life is a position that puts them in the most real way of experiencing that mercy and that grace of God. And so today we pick up on that fifth component in Matthew 25, where it says, "And when I was sick, you came and you visited me." Or in some translations, you came and you tended to me, or you took care of me. And so in our culture, we don't often reveal. We talk about this. We don't reveal our failures, our weaknesses. We don't reveal our sicknesses, our embarrassments, unless it's something big, and then it kind of is out there. Then we kind of are forced to do it. But most of the time, we try to keep those things harbored and in control and hidden. And in our faith, we talk about sinners being saved by grace, and that component is it's not us, it's not by our effort or by our trying or by doing that grace comes, that Christ has offered that was sacrificial, and so we get to receive that. But that doesn't come without us having an effort of working out that salvation. That the salvation comes in a sense twofold. It comes in removing the condemnation that sin has on us, that we are no longer condemned because we commit sins. And then the second salvation, that second level, is that now we don't have to live in that we can now move into a place where we embody what life looks like, walking in grace despite our sin. So one removes the condemnation. The second removes that where we are stuck in living in sin. And so we can actually begin to live into Christ-likeness, or we can live in the kingdom, or we can live as the people of God, and not allowing that stigma or that letter of sin upon our clothes to be that thing which labels us and hinders us. And so there's, as Dallas Willard says, grace is without earning, but not without effort. Meaning we don't get to earn God's grace, but there is this work, as Paul even says in his letters, that we must work out our salvation. That it is this, it's compared to a war, a fight. It's compared to a competition, a challenge by athletes, that there is this work, this training that goes into figuring out and training our bodies, minds, and souls into this rhythm of mercy and grace that Jesus taught about, and is this new message of the kingdom that he offers. And so at Faith, we want to do that. We want to create that space where none of us are trapped by the sin, but at the same time, we don't just live in that pit of despair, if you will, but we move to that place of goodness and holiness and mercy, because we have seen what it looks like in our lives. In 1971, there were two psychologists at Princeton who wanted to kind of test what the teachings of Scripture, the impact that it had on its followers. And so they took 40 seminarians at Princeton, and those are people who are studying to be ordained in ministry to serve in the church. The Princeton's a Presbyterian University. And so they had this in 1971. They did this experiment. They took 40 seminarians. They gave them the story of the Good Samaritan and had them prepare and study. And they said, you're going to give a talk on this. And we'll get a hold of you and we'll let you know when that talk is going to be. And they began to call each and every one of them individually, and they called them into one of the buildings on campus and kind of gave them how this talk was going to unfold. And then they were sent to give the talk. And some of the seminarians were given plenty of time to make their way across campus to the hall in which they would deliver their talk. And others were told they only had a little bit of time. They needed to hurry and get over there because time was short. And on the path from point A to point B, they placed a victim outside of the building. And the victim was lying on the ground and was obviously struggling in a number of ways physically, making audible sounds, but coughing violently, but laying on the ground, all fours on the ground. They would have to cross this person's path. And as they studied these 40 seminarians, those who had plenty of time were more than likely able to stop and help. But even still, the numbers weren't great. I think it was 30% of those stopped and gave attention to this dying, hurting, sick, coughing person who obviously was in need of help. Those who were in a hurry moved on. They had to get to their assignment. They had to get to the talk. I think that was 8% that stopped and actually tended to the sick and the dying person. And so they stepped back and they said, well, what is this? These people who are seminarians, who are going to be pastors, who are trying to take this message of the gospel out into the churches and out into the world so that people can embody this and follow the way of teachings, how is it that when it's given to them, this specific message about stopping and paying attention to those who are in need, how is it that they just pass by it? And their conclusion was that our busyness becomes one of the major factors that keeps us from embodying this Christ message, from being able to follow through with the actions and the abilities and the attitudes and the care and the grace and the mercy that Christ teaches. And so we talked a little bit about that particularly in this culture, in this county, that those things become luxuries that we kind of partition ourselves away from fully embodying this gospel. That we are self-inflate our egos, that we're so busy, that our stuff is so important, that it's so demanding, and so someone else will do this, or someone else can do this. And when we do that, that flies in the face of what Christ is offering in all of his teachings. Flies in the face of what the Isaiah the prophet offered in the Old Testament, of speaking of the Messiah, of what he was going to come and do and how he was going to perform and interact in our lives. Matthew chapter 9, Jesus says, it isn't for the healthy that I came to serve, but it's for the sick. Because the healthy don't need a doctor. They don't need to be taken care of. Their health doesn't need to be improved, and they're not really looking for any need to be met. But it's those who are sick that know that something is off, that something is out of balance, that things aren't working, where they're looking for a solution to be restored. And he says, and I want to restore people who desire being restored, who desire being made healthy. And the healthy have no interest in that. They have no, their minds and their bodies and their lives don't tend to that. Isaiah offered this, and he spoke of this of Jesus, and Jesus then uses this as well in Luke 4. When he begins his ministry, he says, oh, by the way, this is the ministry that I'm bringing. Isaiah said it this way. He said that I'm bringing good news to the poor. He says, I'm going to bring comfort to the brokenhearted. I'm going to set captives. I'm going to release the captives. I'm going to set the prisoners free. That the Lord's favor will be upon those who are mourn, that there will be a crown of beauty for ashes, and that I will remove your despair with a voice of praise. So Jesus articulates that, and he goes on to say, particularly in Luke 4, he goes on to say, and this isn't just for the Jews. He gives a couple of analogies in the Old Testament, stories of the Old Testament, where he says, and where God served people outside of his chosen, those are who I'm going to go to first, because they're the ones who are going to be most receptive to this message of healing and restoration and praise that I'm offering. Recognizing that it's those whose souls who are tired and weary and sick and not quite right, those are the ones that are most receptive to the ground of these seeds that he brings in ministry. And so why is it that we don't tend to the sick? Why is it that we listen, we hear these words, we know this message of feeding the hungry and giving water to the thirsty and the stranger and the naked and the sick and the prisoner. We hear this, and yet we still continue to go back to this religiosity. We want our religious checklist, if you will. These things that are tangible, that say, well, I made it to church on a regular basis. I read the Bible on a regular basis. I prayed on a regular basis. But I ignored the needs of those in the world around me. I didn't pay any attention. I didn't serve those. I didn't take the time for those realities. Well, here are 5 reasons why we don't tend to the sick. 1, we don't see it as a priority. Again, our lives become too busy. We're so distracted by what we have to achieve or what we have to accomplish that we don't take the time to do it. Or we don't have the energy. That we're so busy running our lives and our tasks and our merits that when we actually get a chance to breathe, we're too exhausted to be able to offer compassion, to offer that attention to those who need it beyond our immediate circle and our immediate priorities. And so it's not a priority for us. We don't have margins. We don't have space that allow for us to just be present and to be intentional about tending to the sick, to the hungry, thirsty, to the prisoners. The other problem with this is, as the church has become this, has come into this consumer model where it's the church's job to provide the spiritual resources for the people, as opposed to the people fostering their own spiritual formation. Well, as that's happened, it's the pastor's job. He's the professional Christian, and it's his or her job to tend to the poor, to visit the people in the hospital, to tend to the sick, or best, it's the elders and the deacons. Maybe it's not just the pastor, but it's also just the leadership it's a special calling, it's a special responsibility. And how far that is from the truth. And we do our evaluations with our leadership board, the elders and deacons, and part of that is that part of the expectation that we have at Faith is that our elders and deacons are intentional about making sure that they're checking on the Faith family when it comes to illness, sickness, surgery, any of those things. But it's not exclusive to them. And we try to communicate this, and I'd say for the most part we do a pretty good job at Faith of us all making sure that we're tending to the needs that arise when we hear of them, when we know of them. But we have to make sure that even though we create that as a standard, and that's a standard because we want to make sure that our elders and deacons do that as a natural rhythm and a part of their life. We don't want it to be a checklist, although sometimes that's needed in cultivating those rhythms. We need that accountability to say, okay, I know I have to go back and do this. I know I've got to be intentional about doing this because my mind is more willing to just go about my own routine, my own rhythm, my own list of things. And so we've got to be intentional about pursuing those things. And so we want the elders and deacons to make that a natural part of their life. But we want that also to be infectious so that the rest of the church tends to those needs as well. And like I said, we tend to do a pretty good job with that as long as we keep that in front of ourselves. We also don't see the value in it. It's hard for us to go and spend 30 minutes, an hour with someone who's sick or who's in the hospital and to walk away from that and say, well, what did that accomplish? With that time, I could have done other things. I could have taken care of things at home. I could have gone and volunteered somewhere else where I was organizing or helping with a mission somewhere else and seeing at the end of that the result of that. And so sometimes those intangible ministries, that ministry of the soul, the ministry of presence, the ministry of isolation that comes in that time of sickness, we struggle to understand and see the merit and the wealth of that. Oftentimes it takes that reality for us to be sick, for us to be shut in, for us to be stuck in a hospital or stuck in a bed or unable to do things, and someone to come and offer us that care before we realize how important and necessary that is. And so great for us, how blessed for us if we can realize the need and the importance of being able to tend and be present with those who are sick without that first having to happen to us. We also forget that it's a key expression of Christ's people. That when Christ begins to identify what it looks like to be his people, these are the people who I will call by my name, they're the people who tend to the sick. Jesus talks about this. Jesus' brother James talks about this in James chapter 5, the importance of being present with those who struggle to get out of their home or their space to be with others, to take community and the relationship to them. And then finally, we avoid it because of fear. Well, I don't know how to do that, or hospitals make me uncomfortable, or nursing homes make me uncomfortable, or it's hard for me to see people who are hooked up to certain machines. And so we create all these reasons or excuses or the realities, and it's good to be able to know those things, that these things are hard. I know when I entered into ministry, it was difficult for me to go into those places. But I knew it was absolutely necessary for me to do that. It was necessary for me to overcome those fears, those insecurities. And I found that it really wasn't, the more that I did it, it was more that it was just unknown. And oftentimes we just fear the unknown. And the more that we put ourselves in the place of discomfort in the unknown, it becomes more natural, more present in us. And those fears usually will tend to just dissipate as we spend that time and as we experience the blessing that comes from being present with them. One of the major issues, we talk about, I think we're willing to talk about colds. There are certain things we'll talk about in the way of sickness. Some of them are just unavoidable when we show up and we're nasally and congested and our vocal range is dropped an octave because we have all the mucus inside of us. There are certain sicknesses you can't avoid talking about. But there are plenty of sicknesses that we do avoid talking about. And frankly, there are some sicknesses we don't want to hear about unless we're in more of a private setting. Some people don't know that filter as well. But one of the major sicknesses that we see happening in our culture is mental illness and mental health. And so I want to talk a little bit about this morning because it is so key for us. I was fortunate that when I was at Anderson University, I went to South Meridian Church of God. And the pastor was David Schultz. And David Schultz had led another church in Anderson that was very successful. It found great success under his leadership, and had grown and grown to a point where it became overwhelming for him, to a point where he began to struggle with anxiety and depression, and eventually led him to be needing to admit himself into a clinic so that he could get very deep help with what was going on with him. And so for 3 years, he stepped away from the ministry. He spent time dealing with his depression and his anxiety. And when he came out of that, he landed at South Meridian. He wanted a smaller church, a church that didn't quite have as much going on. And as he did that, every Sunday, he would get up and challenge us with whatever God had given him. But in doing that, he always, not always, but regularly talked about his journey, his struggle with depression, his brokenness and helplessness as he made that journey. And I began to see very unashamedly the story of mental illness play out as David Schultz talked about that with humility, but also with great courage. It was rare that on Sundays I would leave church just not being broken myself and being aware of my own fears and insecurities in life in general. So I learned a lot from David Schultz with my time at South Meridian. I almost sought a degree in counseling as I continued to work with students in churches and college, realizing that there was a huge need for people to get therapy, to talk through a lot of the trauma and the issues that we inherited from our households and our families, that we inherited from unhealthy church communities, and just from life in general. And as I prayed and began to think about that, and Cammie and I had those conversations, I knew I needed to let therapists do therapy work and that I needed to maintain my call to ministry, but I saw the need there early on. This last year, I had a chance to be a part of the Hamilton County Leadership Academy. And in that, we began to go around and talk to governments and schools and a number of systems in the county and what they do and what they offer and how they serve in this area. One of the interesting conversations we had was to sit with the city of Fishers and to sit with Mayor Fadness and some of the Fisher leadership down there, and how they began to realize after a number of suicide attempts within the high school that mental health was a major issue that had to be tackled. Mayor Fadness saw this when he went on a ride-along with one of his police officers. And he asked him, what's one of the scariest calls that you get, thinking it would be domestic violence or some sort of armed experience. And he said it's usually when we deal with those who are experiencing some sort of mental health and their behaviors become erratic and out of control. He says we don't know how to deal with that. And so they began to implement these processes across the city of raising awareness and conversations about mental health, to begin to remove the stigma that it's something that we can't or shouldn't talk about or that we often dismiss. They began to get grants that they could put therapists and counselors in the schools so that these students could have these the issues that they were dealing with addressed. The police department, the fire department were trained in how to recognize but also to respond to issues of mental health issues, and they held a number of events through the schools, through the city, through their faith communities, through their business partners, where they were collectively as a community raising the understanding and the service to dealing with the mental health issues that were in the area. They continue to do this, continue to kind of set the bar for what it looks like to address this as a community, and it was pretty humbling to hear the conversations that came out of that. In addition to that, with HCLA, we sat with the school systems. And we heard from the counselors and the principals and the teachers who now have to find and spend time dealing with the mental health issues that the students are having. Just as I saw this rising in the churches, the teachers and the administrators are seeing that they have to deal with this with their students, that they understand that they can't provide them an education when they're coming with so much baggage and distraction from the pain, from the loss, from the depression, from the anxiety that they're facing from the other components of their life. And so we think about teachers, well, it's their job to educate. But you can't educate if there's so much other chaos and noise going on in your body, and so that has to be dealt with, and the school systems are doing a good job of beginning to look at that and address this. And it shouldn't be too surprising for us because we know that also within the church. We know that when we do missionary work, when we serve in a community that's not our own, we know that we have to address the tangible needs before we can just show up and addressing the spiritual needs. That we know that we can't talk to someone about the love of Christ if they're starving, or if they're naked, or if they're sick. And so our teachers and our administrators are put in a place where they're having to have these conversations that they weren't trained for, that they weren't educated for, and they're getting that training, they're getting that education, and they're figuring out how to have these conversations across the different levels of the education system to make sure that nobody is slipping through the cracks, to make sure that these are having. It's part of the referendum that the Noblesville Schools is having, that they're trying to have these conversations about to make sure that they're bringing in these resources to deal with these kids. It's unfortunate that the issues of our home life, that the breakdown of the institution of family, that the breakdown of relationships and social relationships, and the breakdown of the church institution, that these things have created this hotbed for mental issues to arise, but that is the reality. And so different systems are needing to address and to talk and to work through these issues with the people that are in their circles, to bring them to a place of health, to bring them to a place of wholeness, so they can achieve the things that they're trying to achieve. The stat says that 1 in 4 will struggle with mental health at some point during their life. 1 in 4. 25% of the population at some point will struggle with this. That number seems low to me based on the conversations that I have, but it's what I saw time and time again out there. And it shouldn't be too surprising for us. When we go back and read Scripture, we see that mental health is there in the stories of Scripture that we read. We see this in Hannah's life when she struggles with being able to have a child in 1 Samuel. We see it in King Saul in his later years as being a king, where he becomes very manic in his decisions. He loves David and he hates David, and there just becomes this cycle of kind of self-destruction that happens as anxiety overwhelms him. We see this in the prophet Elijah, when he just desires to die while doing his ministry, where he asks God to just strike him dead while he runs away from the ministry that God has called him to. in 1 Kings 19. We see this time and time again, and we saw it spoke of time and time again with demon possession in the Gospels, that these were demons that really were probably mental illness unaddressed. Not to say that demon possession doesn't happen, but sometimes we create these spiritual excuses for what can be mental or physical excuses. We even see it in the Apostle Paul, where he exhibits times of neurosis and depression in his ministry. In fact, when we see these things in Scripture, for the long time, the church was the one who was guiding the way in conversation, the way to deal this. And the way that we did it was we often over-spiritualized it. We made these things demonic possession. We made these things an issue of the Spirit. And sometimes when we did that, we created victims with this mindset, where we put people into treatment that was inhumane, that was traumatic, and sometimes even fatal. I was reading about some of the mental health trainings that they would try to do, where they would try to drown people. They would stick them underwater until the bubbles stopped coming up, and then they would pull them up and hoping that that would reset their mental health. I'm sorry, that's not a treatment that we should be doing. It's not a treatment that I care to be in. Fortunately, science and society has progressed, that we've been able to remove some of these taboos that come with mental illness. We begin to realize that these maybe aren't spiritual things, but these are things that can be dealt with very tangible results and tangible exercises and practices. And it doesn't mean that all of us need to be trained in how to deal with mental illness. It doesn't mean that we all need to be able to psychologically dissect or identify or understand. But it means that we have to be able to remove the stigma, that we have to be willing and able to talk about it, where we create space where these things can be discussed, where they can be shared, where they can be mentioned. As our society has moved to a place where they're starting to remove those stigmas, we still have a long way to go. Among a circle of artists, there was an Italian artist named Federico Babina, who touched upon a number of psychological illnesses in a series that he did called Archeriatric. It composes 16 different drawings that relate to mental illness. I use 8 of the drawings to be identified as the slide on the screen for this series. I'll send out the link to the rest of them so you can see exactly what each of those do, but I encourage you, as you look at this, think about which mental disorders may be associated with each of the images. But he wanted to create conversation that would help us to visually understand what it may feel like, that when you look at an image, you're like, yeah, that situation, that depression, that anxiety, that OCD, those mental illnesses, those things feel like this from the inside out. And that as we begin to experience and identify these things in ourselves, at whatever level they may be, we can begin to talk about that, and we can begin to tell the story of where we are or where we have been and where we're seeing hope and healing in this process. If you go through and you study physical fitness in school systems, you see some very interesting exercises and some very interesting mindsets that were practiced in the way of physical fitness back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Some pretty weird things were done under the premise of this will create good physical fitness for you. In the same way, our school systems are also addressing mental illness, and some pretty weird things have been done and continue to be done in a way of addressing and dealing with mental illness. But mental illness and physical illness go hand in hand in our overall health of life and our overall health of functioning. And so it makes sense that just as schools have a physical ed curriculum, they should also have a mental health, mental ed curriculum to help create and give tools to our students and to the next generation and to society to begin to deal with the stress, the complications, the frustrations of the world we live in. And we can all admit that the world's getting more frustrating and more complicating each and every day, a little bewildering. And we can't just excuse it as, well, this is the end of times, because they've been saying that for 2,000 years. So we have to stand back and say, this has to be addressed. This has to be taken seriously. We have to come alongside those who are sick, who are dealing with these illnesses. So how do we do that? How do we fight the stigma of mental illness? There's 9 ways that we can do this. First, we can talk openly about it. Something that I've taken on is to be more intentional about, to making sure that I'm speaking about mental illness, because there are a number of us in this room that are dealing with different levels of mental illness. And that can't be a stigma, that can't be something that we stay ashamed or hidden about, but we realize that this is where I am, this is what I'm going through, and yet I'm not staying here. This isn't the camp that I'm willing to live in. And so I'm going to move beyond this. My identity is not shaped by my mental illness, but it is something I'm dealing with. We don't take on a cold and we say, well, I'm just a person that lives with colds. We seek to get healing, we seek to be restored, we seek to get put back in a place of normalcy. And so that happens with awareness and conversations happening. And in that conversation, we can admit that look, I don't know how this conversation goes, or I don't understand these aspects of mental illness. And that admission is okay and encouraged. Second, we can begin to educate ourselves. It's a big topic. It's a huge topic. Sometimes even those in the circle of mental health have a hard time of articulating what's going on. But as we continue to educate and practice and look at how we're addressing this, it should be easier for us to begin to educate and learn about what these things look like. We may not, again, have to know about everything, but we can know about some specifics and the way that it works and operates and presents itself and the people that are around us. That we're conscious of language when we talk about this. That sometimes we'll say the wrong thing, and that's okay. That we should be gracious and gentle with others to help show them how what they've said or what they have said can be seen as negative or offensive or just plain hurtful. That we can encourage equality, again, as I said, between mental and physical health, or mental illness and physical illness. That we need both, just as well as we talk about being physically in shape, that we should exercise, that we should do these things. We should equally talk about the importance of making sure that we're mentally in shape and how we can go about pursuing that. That we should show compassion, not pity, when it comes to mental illness. Nobody wants to be shown pity. Nobody wants for you to see their life or their situation or the story that they're going through and say, oh, poor you, oh, poor them. But to show compassion, which means to give space to them, to explore that, and for you to come alongside them in seeking to understand that better so that you can understand how to better relate to and with them. That we choose empowerment over shame. That we help people who are going through this to own it. Own their mental health, own their mental issue, and then move on with it. We don't get a cold and act ashamed with a cold. It's a reality. It happens. It's a piece of what happens in life. And so sometimes it's preventable and sometimes it's not. And sometimes we get it. And so the goal and the task is to make sure that we're moving again to that place and on that path of health and wholeness. That we're honest about treatments. I got an email a few weeks ago from someone in the community who sent me an email, and she said, could you recommend some counselors and therapists? I've got a friend who needs some help. And so I gave them a list of recommendations that I had, and I said, even if it was for a friend, or even if it was for you, there's no need to be ashamed or to dictate why or how or who it's for. If it were for you, it would be good for you to get that if you were in need of it. And so recognizing that we don't have to ask for a friend or talk about a friend who may be going through something, that we can own that for ourselves. Then when we see conversations had on media, social media, that we gently try to correct those conversations. Sometimes that's not in the public sphere, but in a private message held behind the scenes. And that finally, we don't harbor self-stigma. That we don't think it's okay for others to be in that situation, but not ourselves. And this is often what we do in our culture. Well, I'm willing to be sympathetic towards them, but if that comes to me, I usually am ashamed, I isolate myself, I move to a place of privacy because I don't think that I should be one who has to deal with it. So making sure that we don't harbor self-stigma for ourselves, but allow each of us, including ourselves, to be present in this. The scholar George Myerson recently wrote a study on happiness and wellness. After 250 pages of tracking moments of joy and health throughout history, he concludes that humans are best spending time with friends and people they know, gathered around tables with good food and with conversation and with laughter. And if you can get that table outdoors in the sun where you can be kissed by the sunlight on your skin, if you can dine together and you can also provide help for one another, then according to Meyerson, you've won the lottery of life. Leonard Sweet talks about this in his book From Tablet to Table, where community is found and identity is formed. When Jesus talks about this in Matthew 25, he says, I was sick and you took care of me. Sometimes the taking care of one another, especially the sick, is just being able to be present with them, to make sure that they aren't disassociating themselves from the relationship, from community, and being able to be present, to be with them, even in just what may seem mundane conversation, can be enough to help restore the sick and the sense of the mental ability and the relational ability that they're able to provide. Faith does that well. We do table fellowship well. We do hospitality well. And the way that we can do that better is by taking that and extending that to people that are outside of our circle, so that they can see the healing power that comes through conversation, through friendship, through community, by sitting, by dining, and by sharing at tables in community. It may seem overly simplistic, but the power of connection for those that are dealing with sickness, both physically and mentally, to be connected with others, can be one of the barriers that keeps them from staying in that place of inferiority, or sickness, or unwellness. Let's pray. God, thank you for bringing Christ. Christ who came to be with us, to put on flesh, to sit at tables, to walk among us, to be touched in the marketplaces and the public sphere of life. God, may we be willing to enter into those sick areas, the sick areas of health, both physically and mentally, spiritually and relationally with people. May we be willing to be transparent, to let other people come and sit with us in those situations as we experience that. God, as we begin to look and to explore and discover more about mental health in our own life, but also in the lives of others, God, be gentle with us and be gracious as you always are. And as you do that with us, may we also be willing to extend that grace to others, to seek to understand before we judge, and to be able to offer the ministry of presence as they make their journey to a place of wholeness. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. May God help you to create margins and space and times of unbusyness so that you may respond to the needs of those around you, be they your neighbor or a stranger or your enemy. And as you come close to them, may you realize that you're coming close to Christ in your service, compassion, grace, and love. May God be with you. Go in God's peace.